Welcome to today's presentation, Building the Coded Enterprise. Corey, why don't you kick us off?
Great, thanks April. And thanks everyone for joining today. Talk a little about building the coded enterprise. And in order to take you down this journey, I'm going to talk a little about what are coded enterprises and why they're winning in their respective industries. Tell you a little about Chef's story, where we came from, and more importantly, how that's informed both our technology and our customer engagement philosophy across the board, and then give you a little bit of a roadmap for a path forward to success. So let's get going. To start, I think many of you probably come from organizations that have already recognized the need to be digital. We've got a couple of quotes up here, one from a prominent airline, we're a software company with wings, and another one from a prominent US retailer, we need to be better at technology than Amazon. I think these are two sentiments that just really reinforce the idea that winning in today's market, regardless of what industry segment you're in or what business or goods you're purveying, is really about merging the digital experience with the core competency of your business. And so we see this over and over again in customers who are looking to drive IT results through transformation and ultimately through velocity by becoming more digital. There's no doubt that this is not an easy journey. Many of our customers experience organizational friction. They experience cultural challenges associated with digital transformation, leaving behind some of the processes and values of the past. The tried and true ways that they've operated the business, particularly in IT, are well accepted now, and so it's difficult to institute that change. And the IT technology landscape, or the estate that you manage, is incredibly diverse. Much of it comes from legacy technology eras, and so therefore it's difficult to change. So we recognize that getting there is definitely hard. But one thing that is true is, for our customers, particularly large enterprises, but customers across the board, small or large, that digitally transform with Chef, what we find is that they experience a different cadence and a different velocity to their IT organization that can be incredibly beneficial in driving business results. If we look at a couple of example of an auto manufacturer who really adopted what we're describing as AppOps, or the idea that what we need is end-to-end application delivery and lifecycle management through automation, and they reduced their update time from 7 days for a critical vulnerability fix to just seconds, while eliminating 50% of the failure that they experienced in those exercises. Customers who are struggling with and trying to drive cloud migration projects, and we have one customer who's an airline who moved legacy Windows apps to Azure and now can deploy an update in a matter of minutes instead of the days or even weeks that update planning often took, particularly with legacy apps. And a third one is a global bank who gained efficiencies and reduced risk by basically moving their compliance tests into the development phase of their exercise. And I'll talk more about that a little later on in this webinar. The other thing that we know that is true is the coded enterprise is winning. They ship products 5 times faster. They increase revenue by as much as 23%. They increase profits by as much as 30%. So not only increasing the top line, but also increasing the efficiency of the capital that they're expending. And they've increased, in many cases, their market cap by up to 100%. And so we see that adopting and successfully executing a digital transformation strategy has been incredibly valuable to many industries for which digital is not native, and we believe that this starts at the foundation with the idea of the coded enterprise and fundamental IT automation. One of our core assertions is that velocity will determine future success of organizations, and you can see the quote from McKinsey & Company here. At many large traditional companies, a moment of reckoning has arrived. They must build a modern technology environment that can support multiple fast evolving solutions. I think that is a true statement that we see in many of the customers that we work with, particularly ones that are going through that digital transformation to try and become more natively digital in the way that they operate their IT estate. And it involves a lot of collaboration across a lot of different spans of the organization. This is just one example that we have here, but a common scenario that we see is the intersection of development, of security, and of operations personnel. And that's a difficult collaboration to establish in the organization, particularly to establish that collaboration in a way that actually accelerates the velocity for which you can deliver solutions into the IT environment. And one of the things that we believe is that elite performers deploy in demand. That's a quote from the Doris State of DevOps report from 2018. And there's lots of great ways to measure that. But fundamentally, elite performers can deploy in demand. And that is a true statement that is foundation of the coded enterprise. Collaboration is code, and fundamentally IT automation. So let's look at a few different angles of this. Collaboration through code enables groups with different languages and different goals to work together. The slide that I just showed you showed that infographic of the intersection of DevSecOps, which is an interesting and repeatable pattern that we see in enterprise customers today. If you take a development team lead and an information security leader and your operations manager and put them in a room together and ask them to collaborate on a business outcome or on a project that will deliver a business outcome. Often one of their biggest challenges is that they don't share a common language for how to describe their objectives and ultimately how to describe the real output that they want. And so one of the things that we have experienced is that collaboration through code, by collaborating on an artifact which normalizes the language that everybody uses to describe their end state, really helps groups get together and work together effectively, and also helps build trust and velocity towards their stated outcome. Code is the path to trust and velocity, and we see this over and over again. If I take those three groups, DevSecOps, and put them together and have them collaborate on an artifact which describes the security end state and the operational end state of their application, that collaboration becomes much easier. The language barrier disappears, and they can all agree on a specific outcome and the description and the structured, encoded description of that outcome that they're driving towards. So with all of that sort of in context, what I want to tell you is a little story of Chef, the sort of a history of how we came to believe in code, community, and change through collaboration through code. And it all starts back in 2008. Chef was founded on the idea that infrastructure should be expressed as code. And so therefore created a coding framework in Ruby to be able to describe the end state of a system and or ultimately of an application, given the flexibility of the Chef DSL, to be able to describe the end state of an application. And since then, we've seen over 40 million downloads of the Chef client. There's 70,000 registered users on the Chef Supermarket, which is where we keep our public cookbooks and recipes. There's 3,500 cookbooks and growing every day in the Chef Supermarket. And we've seen customers who've adopted this type of infrastructure as code automation reduce their deployment times by more than 80%. And so that's the foundation of where this all started, is the idea that infrastructure should be expressed as code. One of the challenges that we've witnessed along the way is that enterprises need the following things in the context of being able to manage distributed systems securely. First of all, they need observability. They need to be able to understand and optimize the automation systems that they're deploying for infrastructure, and they need to be able to evaluate and the state of those, and be able to see them under a single pane of glass. Next, you have security, which often is clearly non-negotiable, but is often a velocity killer in organizations as well. And again, a little later, I'm going to talk about why it's often a velocity killer and what you can do to change that. But that's a statement that we see ringing true over and over again, which is that no matter how fast your development team goes or your infrastructure team can deploy, the security and the validation and compliance checks are one of the things that often pull back the reins and impede the velocity of an organization. And we believe through automation that can be changed. And also, the last thing is orchestration. So it's not just good enough to deploy a system, but how do you deploy systems at scale and manage them at scale? How do you systemically deploy patches across operating systems? How do you systemically patch key packages in your IT environments that require lifecycle management and maintenance? And so all of these are challenges that presented themselves next. And so as part of our journey, we launched 2 key projects in 2015 that were the culmination of our learnings in our enterprise customers to help us try and address some of these challenges. The first was Chef Inspec, which has now seen 20 million downloads of the Inspec project itself, and is really a framework that's focused on security and compliance validation via code. Again, building on the infrastructure as code philosophy, we extended that to say security and compliance should be expressed as code as well. And so introduced the Chef Inspec project in 2015. The other one was around visibility and observability and management, scale management of the infrastructure and ultimately of the applications that ride on top of that infrastructure. And so for that, in 2015, we introduced Chef Automate, which currently has 800 plus enterprise customers and enables everybody in your organization at any time to really be able to see the entirety of your enterprise automation distribution, your infrastructure, your security and compliance stance, and now most recently with the introduction of our enterprise automation stack and Habitat, which I'll talk about in a bit, also the state of your applications and application deployments across the environments as well. So Chef Inspec and Chef Automate joined the product portfolio in 2015. And so now we had a way to address some of the challenges that I mentioned on the earlier slides around visibility, observability, security and compliance, and managing at scale. The next set of challenges that we encountered was really about things along the lines of portability, technical debt, and the lifecycle management of application operations. And so what we found were customers were experiencing challenges in refactoring and operationalizing old applications for new environments, particularly as they moved to cloud, but whether they were moving to cloud or private cloud or new data center architectures, being able to port and manage those applications across those environments was particularly difficult. Another challenge that customers experienced was really around technical debt, new application architectures and topologies versus old, and cloud versus on-premise architectures and topologies. And so we found that customers were really struggling with this technical debt and using multiple different approaches or multiple different abstractions to try and deal with that. And the third was that application operations at scale is complex and distributed. And it was a complex web of technology dependencies and manual processes that looked beneath all of this. And that really was the foundation that led us to thinking about the next phase of our product portfolio. Here's a really interesting quote from Chris Gardner at Forrester. Chris says, "Security and infrastructure are inseparable. As zero trust security becomes infused into more infrastructure, the forced segregation of the two is no longer possible. Automation must be secure, and security itself demands more automation. It's a virtuous cycle." We agree with this 100%. And what we've found is that part of the path to trust and velocity is ensuring that you have that security foundation, not just in the checkpoint part of the deployment process, but right from the development aspects of the process as well. And also, automation itself helps make you more secure. The easier it is to push updates, the easier it is to push CVE patches into your environment, the more secure you are across the entirety of your IT estate. And so, agreeing with Chris, it is definitely a virtuous cycle. I'm just going to take a pause for a moment. We talked a lot about sort of the philosophy of enterprise automation and the coded enterprise and what the business benefits of those are. If you're a business viewer of this webinar and have liked what you've heard in terms of what we've said about the business benefits and the challenges of automation, and are struggling with the planning or execution of your own automation journey, please visit us at chef.io/migration and sign up for a free migration assessment. And our automation professionals can come in and help you chart a path through your digital transformation journey. Before you think about buying a lighter bike, make yourself lighter. I love this quote for a bunch of reasons. One, I think it's incredibly prophetic around the idea of really introspecting and viewing the right problem at the right time, and not jumping ahead to technology decisions when what you're trying to do is challenge yourself with process or IT foundational decisions. The other reason I love this quote is because I personally am an avid cyclist and have been through the entire life cycle of spending money on a bike in hopes that what it'll do is make me faster, and come to realize that at the end of the day, it's a human that powers the bike. And so, you know, I can buy with every pound I manage of my own stature, I can probably save myself $5,000 on a bicycle. So there's a little bit of personal in this for me. But taking it back to the foundation of this, before you think about buying a lighter bike, make yourself lighter. Let's talk about what this means in reality. How can we make it easy to work with code? I've been talking a little about the Chef EAS, and we're going to take a little more of a technical exploration down the enterprise automation stack that Chef provides to help drive enterprise automation. First of all, one of the things that we've done is we've tried to abstract the policy of defining your infrastructure, defining your security and compliance, or defining your application end state to something that is a human readable expression of policy. And the example that you see on the left-hand side here is an example of an inspect profile, which describes the policy around securing the operating system environment for a Linux distribution. The question that we're asking here is this a secure Linux environment? In other words, is SE Linux actually installed and running on the system? And you can see it's a very human readable format for this. Describe what package we're looking for, ask if it's installed. If the answer is yes, then the policy passes. If the answer is no, then it doesn't. And we at Chef have been working on building out more and more of this content, more and more of these policy documents, policy artifacts that help drive automation in a turnkey solution for enterprise customers. Today, we have over 700 Chef core Habitat core plans, which means we have 700 pieces of software that are prepackaged and pre-built that are common in the enterprise that you can take off the shelf and use either as dependencies or first order software in your application deployment environments. We have over 150 Chef inspect profiles ranging from CIS and STIG profiles to other types of security and compliance standards as well. And we have thousands and thousands of Chef Infra cookbooks in the supermarket that help with the process of hardening, securing, automating, and deploying software and operating systems in your environment as well. Another thing that we've been working on to try and simplify the process of jumping that chasm to enterprise automation is identifying patterns and figuring out ways that we can help generate the code, the automation code that will actually power legacy apps and even potentially modern apps as well. In this particular example, we've been working on a legacy app migration tool that helps lift applications out of Windows and Linux environments. And we have identified some of the patterns that are common, for instance, IIS apps on Windows 2008 and earlier, and three-tier Java apps involving a web server, an app server, and a database in Linux or Java operating environments. And we have built the ability to discover the applications and package the application binaries automatically to generate the configuration code that is associated with them, and to export that configuration code and package into source control. So what you get is not just an app migration, but you get an app migration that can then be updated and managed via source control, even for legacy applications, which I think is a very powerful paradigm. And we'll circle back on that a little bit when I talk about single path to production. So all of this has sort of gone into the next phase of Chef's expansion, which is the Chef Habitat project. Launched in 2016, currently has 700 prepackaged application plans, and has seen, and some of the results that we see in customers who adopt Habitat for application deployment and lifecycle management is an 80% reduction in the number of scripts that they write to try and manage the nuances of applications running in largely heterogeneous environments. It also gives you the ability to identify bugs or challenges in the operating environment at build time or in the early stage development and testing pipelines versus at runtime as well. And we'll talk a little about Habitat and its basic core philosophy. But if you're unfamiliar with Habitat, it is essentially an automation tool that allows you to express an application and application's dependencies and all of the orchestration steps that are required to make that application run successfully in any environment under any deployment topology. And I'll talk more about that in a bit. So along the way, we've added security and compliance as code. We've added application operations and application deployment and lifecycle management as code with the Habitat project as well. Let's talk about how all these things come together. And for this, I need to take you back in time a little bit and talk about sort of the genesis of Chef and Chef Infra, which is the product name for the original Chef project that I mentioned started back in 2008. The old way of thinking in this world is infrastructure-centric. You start with infrastructure and you build systems from the bottom up using layers and layers of automation to ensure that all the components are placed in the right spot in the right environment for the application that's running on that particular system. And the challenge with that is that it's relatively easy to take that bottoms-up systems-based approach for a single application. But as an IT organization, to do that at scale with all of the applications that you have across all of the environments becomes very, very difficult. It relies on a complex web of dependencies that many of which those dependencies are componentized themselves. And so changing out one component for another, i.e. a la updating to a newer version of a component, has a cascading effect across an entire fleet of applications if you try and manage it systemically. And so the challenge that we experienced over years of success in watching customers build Chef Infra cookbooks for not just operating system configuration management, but also for managing system libraries, updates and packages and middleware, and then ultimately deploying applications, is that this dependency tree became very, very complex. There's a couple of slides next that will really help illustrate this. So if you look at managing a full application stack with just Chef Infra alone, here are some of the players that you have in this. Clearly, you can see in this diagram, you have a Java application, which is our end state. That's really the goal. We need to get a Java application to a working and hardened and security compliant system. And so I've got a Java application with its dependencies being Tomcat and Java and some build dependencies and some runtime libraries, et cetera. In addition, that Java app relies on a database which needs to be deployed on MongoDB and has some additional dependencies, a web server which relies on Apache and has some runtime libraries as well, and an infrastructure base, which is our operating system, which needs the Chef client, kernel tuning, firewall config, and OS patching. In addition to all that, we need to have an audit base. How do we know that this system and the application is secure and compliant? And so for that, we have another set of components and dependencies. All of these, every one of these elements has their own specific dependencies. The Java app has its dependencies. The database and web server have their dependencies. The infrastructure itself has its own set of dependencies and reliance. And then, of course, the security auditing has its own set of dependencies as well. And managing each of these as a complex web of bottoms-up sort of operations that you run on a system to try and reach the desired end state becomes very, very difficult to manage at scale. One of the obvious scenarios that we see is that there's a vulnerability in one of the dependencies, and it requires some runtime library patching, some build dependency patching, and also some OS patching. And the question is, whose job is this? In a world where it's systems layer cake or systems oriented, infrastructure oriented, it's very difficult to manage all of the downstream effects of patching each of those components and then testing that all of the other pieces of the puzzle will still continue to work correctly. And so what we came up with Habitat was really a separation of concerns. Each component in that system is defined as a Chef Habitat artifact. And so in this world, in this scenario, we have, you can see all of the components that we have that were just on the previous diagram. And if you build this a little further, what you can see is that they each have a domain of a separation of concerns. So we've got the app tier, which is we've got a web server and the actual web application that's deployed, and it can be described as a Habitat package. We've got all of the middleware, which can be managed as individual or aggregate middleware packages on the system. We've got the infrastructure, which can be managed and lifecycle managed with its hardening and operating system tuning parameters as a Habitat package. And then we've got the security and audit concerns packaged and managed separately against the entirety of the system. And so what we get when we apply this to the real world is that we get a slightly different view of the world than traditional Chef has given us before, which is a separation of concerns between the infrastructure or operating system level of automation and the actual application level of automation as well. If you look at the right-hand side of this diagram, what you'll see is our reference architecture for how to think about managing operating system and infrastructure automation and the application automation deployment that goes on top of it. Chef Infra cookbooks are really specifically targeted at operating system hardening and tuning parameters and building, if you will, cattle on which all of your applications can run successfully. Systems that are symmetrical in their deployment and can easily be managed systemically as well. On the application side, we've got Chef Habitat plan files, which can account for the application and all of the layers of dependencies that that application needs, and can be built into tested and validated pipelines where changing any one of the components has a very, very clear and obvious way to understand the downstream or upstream impacts of the entire ecosystem. And then on the left-hand side of the diagram, Chef InSpec is our tool for security and compliance modeling and can be used to manage the security and compliance footprint of the entire system from top to bottom. Most recently, in April of this year, we announced the Chef Enterprise Automation Stack. This is the convergence of our Chef Infra, Chef InSpec, and Chef Habitat projects working together to form an enterprise automation stack for customers, and also building into that additional functionality for observability and to address some of the developer experience. And in the next slide, we'll talk a little about what those components are. This is really the culmination of the work that we've been doing for more than a decade now around enterprise automation, and we've developed some very clear and understandable patterns for deploying that type of automation and achieving the scale and the velocity that we talked about in the first part of this webinar. Chef enables coded enterprises. So what you see here is a diagram that outlines the components of the Chef automation stack. At the core of that are Chef Infra, which is our infrastructure automation as code technology, security with Chef Inspect for security and compliance as code, and application automation using Chef Habitat for all of the software that rides on top of the operating system. And the bookends to this, of course, are that if you deploy these three components at scale in your organization, of course, you need observability and manageability across the entire fleet. You need to know what your infrastructure is doing. You need to know what your application deployment state is, and you need to know what your security and compliance validation looks like across that entire estate. And for that, we have Chef Automate, which gives you the ability to view and manage your entire estate across the enterprise through one single portal, one single view. On top of that, what we recognized is that part of the challenge that customers have in getting started with all of this is the developer experience and collecting all of the tools necessary. And so with that, we've developed and released Chef Workstation, which gives you an easy way to set up all of the tools and all of the environment that you need at a developer workstation level, and to keep those tools and environment and capabilities up to date as you build out, to start building or as you build out your automation artifacts. Our view on enabling automation at scale. First, there's a couple lessons to come here, but the first thing is there's three core tenets: that everything should be managed as code in your environment. Codify the entire stack that we talked about, and enable a consistent path to production across the entirety of that. And I'll talk a little about consistent path to production in a second. The second thing is the right automation tool used for the job. And I'll go back to the diagram I just showed you that had our stack or our layer cake of software on a system with Chef Infrastructure and Chef Habitat working collectively to manage the infrastructure and the application stack on top of it. So use the right tool for the right job, which is really that top-down automation approach for applications and the bottoms-up infrastructure approach for infrastructure management. And then the last thing is that tools are accessible to users with various skill sets. And so we've been working to build more content that allows you to get started out of the box. We believe that infrastructure should be effortless and that you should really only have to configure the parameters of your infrastructure rather than write code to manage the deployment of your infrastructure. And so that's one of the product initiatives that we've been going after and spoke a lot about in the effortless infrastructure pitch from ChefConf this year, ChefConf 2019 in Seattle. We also see the need for making it easier to get started with tools and capabilities, and we've been working hard on the developer experience around Chef Workstation as well. The next thing, which is a sub-bullet of the previous page, consistent path to production. This is true for infrastructure, this is true for applications, this is true for security, regardless of what your end state operating environment looks like. And so one of the things that we see here is that base images should be consistent across your organization. If they're not, it's because you're building snowflakes to support specific application deployments. And with the right automation technology and using the right tool in the right hierarchy, you can actually separate the concerns of infrastructure from the application lifecycle management itself. You should have consistently compliant infrastructure as well. And this is where security should not be a snowflake exercise for every single system in your organization. You should start with a standard baseline image and manage the security and compliance of that image systemically across the organization. this is something that we see in digital high performers is a true statement. Their infrastructure is symmetrical, their security and compliance is symmetrical with a consistent path to production. The next is applications, and applications are, of course, the most complicated because applications are where we go from making cattle into making pets, right? And so one of the challenges that we have here is that when you start talking about applications, the list of different technologies that go into making those applications is expansive, to say the least. And so that typically predicates different source control, different build pipelines, different artifact stores. One of the things that we see about digital high performers is their path to production, regardless of what choices they make about application deployment or topology or application architecture or deployment topology, their path to production is consistent. And so with the Chef Enterprise Automation Stack, you have the ability to define application packages that are consistent regardless of the technology or the era of the technology that they came from, and also completely consistent and late bound into the deployment topology that you might be going for. So whether you're an on-premise VMware customer or AWS or moving heavily towards Microsoft Azure in the cloud, or you've chosen Kubernetes as your container technology, or Docker for that matter as your container technology, that should not have a material impact on the type and the pattern of build pipelines, of CI/CD, of source control, and ultimately of how you package and deploy your applications. And so we believe that there's an abstraction between the deployment topology, the application architecture, and the actual packaging and automation of those things from development through to production. Here's a really great example. This is a quick little 2-slide example of why pipeline complexity creeps into organizations. So on the left-hand side, what you've got is you've got the application development side of it. It's easy. I'm building a Java application or a .NET application. Building it is as simple as running Maven or the .NET build process, and developers can do that consistently on their laptops in those environments. The challenge is when you transition that same thing into how do I then run the application in the deploy phase, developers and production operations personnel would have two different views of that. The developer would say it's easy, you just run your Java app by calling Java with the right jar file, or you call the .NET run command. Operations engineers or SREs or in the DevOps world, you want to automate that. And so then what you really have is you have an execution run script, or you want to wrap that in some kind of scripting or repeatable process. This is super complicated when you have what you're experiencing or witnessing here is the disparity between the build and the deploy environments that happen when you're trying to manage applications. And this is one of the disconnects that saps the velocity out of deploying systems to production in IT environments. One of the answers for that is to normalize it. If you start in your build pipelines as the way that I build a package of software, I write code in my environment of choice, whether it's Java or .NET, but the way that I build a package of software for testing and for validation in my development environment is via a single command, have package build, and that is the unique and symmetrical command for all environments and all technologies that I choose. And that carries through to the deployment environment as well. Have package promote is consistent across the deployment environments as the way to get tested and validated code into the production pipeline. This radically simplifies that chasm between the development side of the house and the operations side of the house. And again, getting back to collaboration through code, no better way to do this than to have an artifact that can be used in both sides of the equation. I mentioned this before, but I'm going to reiterate it again. One of the great things about the enterprise automation stack is the level of flexibility it gives you to be unopinionated about the technology that you choose to build your applications, or the technology that has been chosen in many cases to build your applications, and the deployment environment that you want to go to. Using the enterprise automation stack with the pattern that we've described with Chef Infra and Chef Habitat being the two key automation components for infrastructure and application automation, and Chef Inspect for security and compliance automation. One thing is true, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about legacy apps or cloud native apps, or they're COTS apps or packaged off the shelf apps, or custom things that you've built on cloud native technology. You can have consistency in the way that you package and manage the promotion of those packages through your build pipelines and automation. And ultimately, the same packages can be deployed to an on-premise environment, a virtualized environment, a cloud native environment, or a container environment in either the cloud or on-premise. Anywhere, you can have the same artifact, the same habitat heart file be deployed to any of those environments and operate exactly the same way as it would in any other environment. So you don't have to be specific about the deployment topology. I think this level of flexibility is a really, really powerful abstraction for IT organizations that are going through digital transformation and have a variety of different technologies and a variety of different deployment topologies to manage. Let's talk a little about a path forward for success. How do you put all of the pieces together here? First of all, we believe that automation through code untangles the mess that is currently experienced by most IT organizations. The coded enterprise using coded artifacts helps you move with velocity, engenders trust, repeatability, and securely delivering value to customers across your entire application portfolio. How do you do this? You define all the elements that your application needs, including the infrastructure, the security and compliance policies, and the application lifecycle dependencies as code. They must be coded artifacts. You must be able to commit them to source code control and version control them and manage them. And the changes in source code should then propagate the automation pipelines that help you validate, test, and deploy your applications to production environments. Why code? Because it's inherently collaborative. Again, 3 different groups, Dev, Sec, and Ops, they speak different languages, but there's one thing that's true. If they're collaborating on a piece of code, the language is ubiquitous across the board. It helps them to manage their process at scale. It helps them to make sure all of their requirements are all put into the same bucket and are being managed symmetrically across the board. The coded enterprise overcomes digital challenges by managing everything as code. It helps you align the organization on the collaboration through code front. It gives you a consistent path to production and allows you to normalize some of the patterns, maybe not the tools, maybe not the exact build scripts, but it helps you manage and make consistent the patterns of the path to production for how you go from development through your test environments into production. And it helps you become secure by design because it helps you shift your security concerns left in the DevOps diagram. Talk about that right now. So one of the challenges of modern software development is that it is both federated and distributed. And often what we see in companies that are adopting DevOps today is that what they have is they've allowed their development teams to move fast and move agilely with a large berth for making technology decisions about what technologies they should use to deliver business value, which is great. And they do that, and they can adopt that very, very quickly. The challenge that we see is that when those teams then try and state transition those projects or those applications into pre-production and production environments, they reach a roadblock where often many of the things that aren't done in the development side of the diagram, such as testing, such as security and compliance validation, etc. All of that is stacked into manual process on the right side of the DevOps diagram. Before something can go operational, it has to pass the checklist. It has to go through risk mitigation. And by not automating those parts of the components, you lose all the gains that you got on the left-hand side of the diagram. You lose all the velocity you have to being able to actually ship changes or ship value to your business. And so our proposal there is that if you stack not just development, but operations and security concerns into coded artifacts and build them into the automation pipeline, what you guarantee is that you have consistent velocity all the way from your development environment through to your production environment, because all of the concerns, all of the risk mitigation is built into systems automation that happens as a part of the overall development process. And I think this is one of the most key benefits of really embracing the idea of the coded enterprise and embracing the idea of enterprise automation that any company can experience. I want to switch gears a little bit here and just tell you a little bit about our software, our philosophy of software development at Chef. And for what it's worth, we have heavily invested in all of the things that I've talked about in terms of automation of our own build pipelines and the ability to ship changes quickly and with velocity. It's a tremendous amount. We ship updates every single day at Chef across the entirety of our product stack. And so I think, we are living proof to some degree that the benefits of this kind of transformation are real. One of our philosophies of software development is based on the idea of collaboration through code. Not only do we believe it's important for customers to use the idea of collaboration through code, but we also, as an open source software company, believe in collaboration through code. Our collaboration is with our customers and our users and our contributors in our open source projects. And the most effective conversation or the most effective exercise that we have with any of those groups is by collaborating on the code base of our open source projects. And in keeping with that, in April, we announced that 100% of our product software will be built as open source software going forward. This for Chef was a state change from having a mix of proprietary and open source software, and going forward, 100% of our software is really focused exclusively on or is built exclusively in open source software development principles. So that means not just the software development or the software engineering part of it, but also we're endeavoring to open up as much of our product development process, our prioritization, our triage, et cetera, as possible to our collaborators, which are our customers, our partners, and our contributors at large to the open source community. The other part of that is that we are really focused on enterprise customers and helping enterprise customers drive automation in their organization. And so we produce a set of software distributions, the builds of our various different open source projects that are hardened commercial distributions designed to be deployed as turnkey solutions by enterprise customers. And those are tested across a wide range of platform support, et cetera. And so those are sort of the two core philosophies, which is our focus on open source software development and our focus on creating enterprise-ready distributions of our software for Chef customers. For those that aren't a Chef customer, or maybe those that are and are asking the question in the world of open source, what's the value of having a Chef's license subscription? And the answer is this, and I won't read all the words on the page, but number one is you get the enterprise distribution of our software, which is the one that we test across many, many platforms and maintain not just current platform, but legacy platform support for, et cetera. The distribution of our software that comes from our open source projects is the best, most expert distribution of the software possible, with a high degree of focus on user experience and the ability to install and get up to speed with turnkey solutions. You get access to our enterprise content and updates. I talked about some of the CIS profiles as an example, Habitat plans. We package all different kinds of software in Habitat, and that list and library continues to grow. And of course, Chef Infra cookbooks, et cetera. We're working hard on a pattern of non-coding configuration for infrastructure automation and hardening that we call effortless infrastructure. and that is continues to roll out in phases to customers over time. So you get access to not just the best software, but enterprise content and all of the updates and security vulnerabilities and patches that we push on a regular basis to all of our enterprise distribution of software. You get access to automation expertise, which is Chef's customer success, professional services, and support people, which are some of the brightest, most experienced automation experts in the industry. And for many enterprise customers, this is important. You also get assurance and support. This is warranty and indemnity of the software that you're using. This is the ability to pick up the phone or open a support ticket at 3 o'clock in the morning when things aren't going well, and knowing that you have a company with the stature of Chef behind you to be there to help you be successful. The best way to build software is to do it in close collaboration with the people that use it. This is something that I said at ChefConf this year, and I believe this to be true across the board. One of our commitments to 100% open source software development is based on this idea, that the best way to build software is to do it in close collaboration with the people that use it. And that's one of the driving philosophies that really helps us, informs us on how we engage with our community, with our customers, with our partners, and with our users at large. And so just to finish off, I mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again. I took you through some of that sort of the business value of the coded enterprise and what we're seeing in enterprise customers in terms of results, some of the challenges to get there. We talked a little about the history of Chef and how that relates to the technology stack that we have today, the enterprise automation stack that we announced in April, and some of the challenges that you may or may not have already experienced in your journey around automation and digital transformation. If you liked what you heard, or you're interested in hearing more, we have a program going right now where we can come in and help you do a migration assessment on your environment, whether that's you have an existing installation of Chef and you're thinking about how do I apply some of the new patterns and deployment topologies of Chef Infra itself, whether you have legacy apps that you're looking to migrate to the cloud and wondering how Habitat can help you. If you go to chef.io/migration and sign up for a free migration assessment, our team can come in, talk to you, understand your goals, take stock, and help you build an execution plan towards that. And we're willing to engage with you today. And it's a free migration assessment. So please, chef.io/migration if you're interested in learning more. And with that, I think we're done with the materials. I'm going to advance it to sort of the closing slide. April, do we have any questions that have come up along the way?
Yes, we can go to questions. We would love to hear from you. So any questions you have, please submit them through the Q&A widget and we will try to address them here. We do have a couple that have come in. So the first one is, as an existing Chef Infra and Automate user, what's the best way to introduce Habitat and the enterprise automation stack into my org?
That's a great question. So for existing users out there, my strong recommendation would be to look at your existing Chef deployment to start with. And really what you want to do is you want to think about some of the new patterns of deploying the Chef client coupled with content in order to get some experience around Habitat. That's a sort of the first step on the maturity curve that we have for existing Chef customers. And so I'd encourage you to reach out to your customer success team and talk about the effortless infrastructure sort of migration path and where to start. And our team's more than happy to help you out with that.
Awesome. And then what benefits are clients seeing that have implemented the new effortless approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think for most of our customers, I think one of the challenges of being successful with Chef in the past is that that they have their success, they sort of fall victim to their own success to some degree, which is that the larger and the more successful your automation deployment is, the more sort of dependencies you're managing and the more the test footprint is harder to manage across a wide range of components. And so one of the benefits that we see of customers who are implementing the new effortless approach is to really simplify both the deployment topology and also the ability to manage changes in that environment, and manage changes really through source code control in a very locked and easy to test way. And so by combining Chef and Inspect with Habitat and using Habitat as the deployment topology for Chef and Inspect clients themselves on systems, it simplifies the relationship between the client version that you have and maybe the content that you have, and allows you to be a little more flexible and run maybe multiple streams together.
Great. And then let's see. How does Chef see its solutions supporting a Kubernetes and container strategy?
Yeah, so that's a great question. One of the things we hear often from enterprise customers is, I've chosen a container strategy and it's Kubernetes. And so therefore, like somehow magically all of the challenges of digital transformation and one path to production are going to go away. The reality is that whether it's Kubernetes or Docker or whatever your container strategy is, there's still an inherently a bottom-up systems approach to those types of solutions. One of the things that Chef does really well, particularly with the enterprise automation stack in conjunction with containers, is it normalizes all of that build pipeline work, and it forces you into a scenario where really you're focused on deploying applications and deploying applications symmetrically onto those containers. We see customers who are along their container journey and have very similar challenges to the challenges that they had before they chose containers, which is that their base container template has become bloated because it needs to account for many dependencies that come from many different applications that aren't bundled with the applications themselves. And so my advice to people is, if you're early or even if you're in the middle of your container journey, it's a strong recommendation to take a look at Habitat as a platform for creating and managing the actual application deployment to your container environment. What you'll get out of it is you will get the leanest, meanest containers known to man because of the way that Habitat builds packages based on a clean room. And ultimately, it will guarantee that all of your apps work in all of your scenarios and radically reduce the complexity of your container cluster deployment overall, because you can run less patterns to support less application environments. So that's it.
Excellent. And let's see. So does the Chef stack work with commercial off-the-shelf applications like SAP, Oracle, and Microsoft SQL?
Yeah, for sure. We actually have a lot of customers packaging COTS apps, whether it's like middleware infrastructure like Oracle database or Microsoft SQL Server with the EAS, with Habitat in particular, but with the whole EAS stack. And that's true for any type of application. We have a customer who's an SAP R3 reseller who packages the entirety of an SAP R3 distribution with Habitat and can do that distribution in like 45 minutes. There's really very few limitations to the applicability of Chef EAS with COTS applications, with the exception of the fact that there are a few architectural limitations around, say, for instance, 16-bit Windows applications, which, there's not really a path forward for those anyway. And there are a few other sort of minor, long historical issues, but definitely Chef EAS works with COTS apps largely across the board. And there's a lot of value in that as well. Even if you don't have the source code for your applications, packaging your binaries and getting them into source code control and a pipeline is incredibly valuable.
Perfect. Thanks, Corey. That's all the time we have for questions today. Really appreciate all your time. As a reminder, a copy of today's presentation and resources are located in the resource list widget at the bottom of the screen. We encourage you to download the slide deck and bookmark any links that you might find useful. You'll also see the migration assessment link there as well. We hope you found value in the presentation. Please share with your teammates and professional networks. The on-demand version should be available by tomorrow, and we'll email you as soon as it's available. You'll be able to access it using the same audience link you're using now. Thanks again for your time, and happy automating.